You hear about it all the time on the news, the economy's health, and it almost always gets boiled down to this one single number, gross domestic product, or GDP. But what is that number really telling us?
And that leads to the real question, doesn't it? When the headlines are all celebrating a jump in GDP, does that automatically mean life is actually getting better for all of us? Well, as we're about to see, it is way more complicated than that. So, to really answer that, we've got to get a solid grip on what this famous number even is. Let's start with the basics of the most common yardstick for economic growth, GDP. Okay, so think of GDP as a giant calculator. It's adding up the price tag of everything made and sold inside a country's borders. We're talking everything from cars and coffee to software and haircuts. It's often used as the main stand-in for a country's economic output, basically because it's tracking all the money changing hands. But here's where it gets really interesting. While GDP is fantastic at counting up all this spending, it doesn't necessarily tell you how productive or how efficient an economy is actually becoming. And that right there is an absolutely crucial distinction. This quote really hits the nail on the head. See, real progress isn't just about more money flying around. It's about getting more bang for your buck, getting more output from the same amount of work or technology or raw materials. It's about working smarter, not just spending more. Now, to get a slightly different angle on all this, we can look at another metric. It's one the US actually used to prefer, and it's called Gross National Product, or GNP. So this slide makes the difference pretty clear. GDP is all about what gets produced here, physically inside a country. So let's say there's a car factory in Ohio that's owned by a foreign company. All the cars it makes, that counts towards US GDP. But GNP is different. It's about the income flowing to US, as in a country's citizens. So the profits from that factory that gets sent back to its foreign owners, that would count in their country's GNP, not America's. And here's a little bit of trivia you might not know. Up until 1991, America's main economic report card really was GNP. The only reason we switched to GDP was mostly to make it easier to compare our economy to other countries. This just goes to show you that the metrics we use are a choice. They're not some law of nature. Okay, so this all builds up to the most important question of all. Does a bigger GDP number automatically translate to a better standard of living? Let's test that idea with a quick thought experiment. All right, just imagine a law gets passed tomorrow that says every single worker has to work an extra 6 hours a week. More hours worked means more stuff gets produced, more services get done. So what would that do to our big number? Well, with everyone putting in more hours, the total output would almost definitely shoot up. More work means more production, which means a higher GDP. On paper, that looks fantastic. Economic growth. It's a clear win, right? Well, hold on a second. Maybe not. This is where we have to look past the number itself. Because even if the economy got bigger, according to GDP, did life actually get any better for the average person?
This table just lays it all out, plain and simple. GDP goes up, check. But productivity, how much we get done per hour, that stayed exactly the same. And the really big one, every single worker just lost 6 hours of their personal time every week. If that lost time with family or for rest or hobbies isn't worth the extra money, then you could argue the standard of living has actually gone down.
So, if GDP on its own can be this misleading, what's the answer? Well, we need to stop thinking about the economy as having one single speedometer. It's much more useful to think of it like a pilot's dashboard, full of all sorts of different instruments. To get a truly clear picture of what's going on, you have to look at several things at once. We've got GDP for output and GNP for income, but you also have to look at things like the Consumer Price Index to track inflation, employment reports to see who has jobs, and even nerdier stuff like multi-factor productivity to see if we're actually getting more efficient. And let's just zoom in on CPI for a second, because it is so important. It measures inflation. It tells us whether our paychecks are actually buying us more stuff or less stuff than they did last year. I mean, a rising GDP doesn't mean much if the cost of everything is rising even faster, right? So let's bring this all home. The point here is not to throw GDP in the trash, not at all. It's about learning how to use it more intelligently as just one part of a much bigger picture. So here's a simple, really powerful way to think about it from now on.
Start with GDP, sure. See how much stuff is being produced. But then immediately check GNP to see who's actually getting the money. And finally, you have to layer on inflation and jobs to see what all this means for an average person's wallet and their quality of life. And that's really the bottom line here. GDP is a vital tool. It's essential, no doubt, but it is just one tool on the dashboard. To really know if you're flying safely, you have to look at all the gauges together. So from now on, the next time you see one of those headlines shouting about GDP growth, you'll know what to do. You'll be able to ask the most important question there is. Okay, but what is the rest of the dashboard telling us?